I'm Eric, a.k.a. Currently from Brantford, but born in Hamilton, raised all over Canada, came back. I currently play bass in about 4 different bands, them being the Vapids, Wasted Age, Hexoffender, and a kind of cool little side project called Streetmouth. My personal influences growing up for me mostly was my mom and my dad, Axel and Kathy Feldner. They were amazing. They taught me to be my own self, to really be free-spirited and not to follow people around or be heavily influenced by what is out there in the media, to think for myself. Even this weekend, I went and got my FAC, and all the years of me and my dad doing target practice and everything, I didn't really think it sunk in, but when I was doing these tests, it was like I already knew everything. And then I realized that was my dad, and that was 35, 40 years of him being an awesome dad to me, and really like not pushing things on me, but really letting me become my own person. And my mom was highly influential with art, music. My mom played guitar, my mom painted, my mom did all this stuff, and we shared a really strong love for music, mostly the blues. And that's what kind of got me to where I am today, because I had these influences, and it was pretty much to think for yourself. And I still hold that today, true today. Musically, growing up, my huge influences were, my dad used to run with a pretty heavy crowd, and his name was Hack, and he was a musician, not in the way of playing bands, but he would play guitar and everything for me, and I would get babysitted by him, and I thought he was like the coolest guy in the world. And by the time I got to be a teenager and that, music came along, and I started picking up a bass and just started playing music with friends and that. And yeah, those people really shaped me growing up. So musically, what really influenced me was a really good friend of mine, Jimmy Vapid. When Raining Sound opened in Hamilton was the first time meeting Jim. And before, I would see his band, the Vapids, a few odd times, and you know, they were, at the time I was probably heavily into hardcore, so here's this pop punk band, but I always thought, no, this band's a little bit different. They're pretty raw and fast, and so knowing that, when I walked into Raining Sound and finally meeting Jim, and then Jim and I started talking about all the bands we were really into, and one thing we hit it off was that we both really loved the Ramones. And then Jim was like, do you play anything? And I'm like, well, I kind of pretend I know how to play bass. And Jim goes, oh, really, you like bass guitar? And I was like, yeah, I do actually. So he took a piece of paper and he wrote out, what was it? Sheena's a Punk Rocker, the tab. He goes, go home and learn this. So I went home and started, I'm like, hey, this is not hard. Like, I can figure this out. And I went back the next day and showed Jim, and Jim was like, how are you?
You're in.
Like, wow, this is awesome, Dad. And I ended up playing in a band. Jim was kind of like my doorway into the Hamilton music scene. I started playing in a band called The Orphans, which was straight up surf, rock and roll, garage rock. And those guys, Dave Ellie, Mark Bull, and Steve Thacker, school would be hard for like 2-3 years. And while I was getting and learning from all of them, Jim was still there giving me ideas, giving me pointers. And he just kind of like guided me along to the point where he's like, okay, hey, you want to join my band, the Vapids? I was like, what? You think I could play in your band? He goes, hell yeah. And that's what kind of started me musically. But a lot has to do with Jimmy Vapid. So another musical influence I had, it was brief but intense, was a friend of mine called Tim Beck. He played in a band called Ride Star and Action High. And he really kind of taught me not to worry about things, or don't worry about screwing up when you play, keeping it fun. I had a brief band with him called Mother's Worry / Wild Zero, and it was with him and Curtis Gordon from Haymaker. Briefly we had Mark, the singer, Ride Star singer band, but unfortunately that ended on a bad note. But Tim was just one of these really good spirits I met that was never negative, really positive, and I just remember the fun I had with him, and he reminded me always to keep it fun and not take it too seriously, and just enjoy being with a group of friends and playing your own loud, crazy music, and kind of just enjoy things. Don't take things too heavy. So, thanks, Tim. So, what got me into metal, punk, and hardcore? Well, initially I would say my parents always just used to ask me, Eric, why do you like this crazy music? And I would turn around and tell them, well, it's all your guys' fault. And they were like, how? I'm like, well, growing up, this was like the VHS boom, and they were such a new thing. My dad loved all the crazy horror movies, science fiction, and this time in the early 80s, they were putting a lot of punk and metal and stuff in these movies. So I remember, what's the one movie? Class of 1984, where I'm watching it thinking it's this post-apocalyptic movie, science fiction movie, and there's Teenage Head playing in there, and I'm like, who's this band? And everybody's being all rough and rowdy and everything, and I'm like, this is so cool. And really it was my parents just letting me have free reign on being influenced by the media, and seeing all that stuff. And then by the time I became a teenager, it was like, yeah, there was this stuff you'd see on video hits and stuff that was really like, what is this? I want that stuff I saw in those crazy movies. And that's where a lot of that influence came from, was just me seeing it on TV and everything like that. And then eventually, when becoming old enough, venturing out and looking for these smaller stores and everything to find this music. And that was a big thing that got me all into that. And the fact that at that time, it was just like, you'd see a punk band and the crowds it was just utter chaos. It was just like, what is going on here? Like, this is not like a concert you would see on TV where everyone's sitting there and being nice. People are jumping on the stages, flying off, like people are there with the band. And it was just so gravitating to see that it just drew me right into it. So the first concert I ever went to would have been 1984 Iron Maiden Power Slave Tour. I will admit I would have been only 9 years old at the time, but yeah, I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan, and there they used to always advertise on TV big concerts that were happening in Regina, and all I saw, and I imagine my dad was sitting behind me when I saw this commercial for the first time, was Iron Maiden playing, and it was showing Eddie a lot. So Eddie would like come out all wrapped up like a mummy, and he would like hang over Steve Harris and shake himself, and him and Bruce Dickinson would have sword fights on stage, and then this giant Eddie would come out and shoot sparks out of its eyes, and my mind just exploded when I saw all that. I remember turning around going, Dad, you need to take me to this concert. And my dad going, how am I going to take my kid to a heavy metal concert? So he takes me. I don't know any of the bands, but it was one of the most life-changing moments I ever had because I never saw anything like that. And yeah, that kind of like probably is what got me started. Because I remember also Iron Maiden came back 3 years later on the Summer in Time tour, and my dad automatically knew I better get tickets for this, or I was going to be really upset that he didn't get to see Eddie from Iron Maiden. Had nothing to do with the band; it was all Eddie.
Yeah.
So my first punk hardcore metal show probably would have been a hardcore show or a punk and a hardcore band, and it was in St. Catharines. The bands were Ill Minds and the Sick Boys at the Underground, which was this downstairs bar over on, I think, the northeast side of the city. And I remember going there and being all excited because I'm like, oh, this is gonna be crazy! Like all those cool Black Flag and Dead Kennedys things I see on TV. This is it. And I walked down there, and if anybody knew anything about St. Catharines in the late '80s. When you went to a lot of these shows, there was a lot of Nazi boneheads at these shows, and I remember walking in, and probably being scared out of my life because 80% of the crowd was Nazi skinheads. And it wasn't like the bands were into that, it was at that time the scenes were totally mixed. There would be boneheads, goths, punks, hardcore kids, metal dudes, everyone hung out, it wasn't splintered yet. So it was almost like you could go to these places and you tolerated each other. But that did eventually end up changing a lot in the 90s. And a lot more lines were drawn in the sand and a lot of more things became separated. Some of my most favorite shows I've ever been to would have been one here in Hamilton. It was at the Tivoli Theater, when the Tivoli Theater still had a front foyer, and Skinny Puppy came to Hamilton on their Last Rites tour and played. At that time though, being like a kid, no internet, nothing, I had no idea who Skinny Puppy was. But the opening band would have been a band called Godflesh, and I had just discovered them, and I was super hot for them, super excited to go to the show. I get to the show, and sure enough, Godflesh never even got allowed into the country. They never showed up here until about the mid-2000s. So being super disappointed that I didn't get to see this band I was really hot for. Skinny Puppy comes out, and I've never really had a band blow my mind like that. It was like watching a horror movie going on at the time. Ogre was putting masks on his face, he was ripping his guts out. They were dissecting a dog, and there was blood and guts everywhere. He'd come out on stilts like a mutated monster. There was all this crazy imagery and the insane beats and everything. It was like, wow, who is this band? And then finding out that they were Canadian, and yeah, it just totally twisted my mind, right? Like, that's when the twists started happening. Other bands that some of my favorite shows, seeing Danzig on the Lucifuge tour, and not knowing at that time, because this is all before the internet, so you didn't know who was in what or who was who or anything like that. And being really into this Danzig band, not knowing that this is Glenn Danzig, the singer of the Misfits, and even at that time being into the Misfits and not making that connection, going to the show, and again, crowds mingled at that time. There was no lines at all. Everyone were outcasts. And I just remember going in and being, again, scared, because I swear to God, I've never seen so many Nazi skinheads at a show in my life. And then, yeah, it was like, I enjoed being scared at these shows, because it was exhilarating. You got to watch your ass. You were a kid, and there was like, 6'5" huge dudes like that were intimidating as. That was really crazy. And then probably later on, I'm older, probably around 21, maybe not even younger, probably like 18 or 19. I go to see a band called Total Chaos, and it was at the Elmo Combo in Toronto. and this opening band opens up, and they just absolutely blow my mind. I'm like, who are these guys? I have no idea who they are. Never knew until I kind of ran into a guy later, and he told me that was Left for Dead from Hamilton. And at that time, there was nobody in hardcore that, well, there was, but there were American bands like Infest and stuff like that. They didn't really come up here a lot. So here was this band, Left 4 Dead, playing this insane, fast, power violence, crazy hardcore, and that was the linchpin. I saw them, and it made all the other stuff like Rancid and NoFX just seemed so mamby-pamby. Like it was just weak. And here's this band where like Callahan is just screaming his head off, and like the riffs were just sick. Like nobody played like that, and I just kind of stood there in utter shock. And then Total Chaos came on, and they were cool, but it just wasn't what I just saw. So some of those shows, and there's probably a million other shows I could say that were really, really awesome. Dillinger Escape Plan and an Exclaim Anniversary Party. They show up. Under the Running Boards just came out. Band's huge and hot and everything, and when the band goes on, 3 guys get up on stage and they say, okay, well, our singer quit. You guys know all this stuff. They take the mic, they throw it into the crowd, and they just play the whole album, and the whole crowd sang the lyrics. And it was pretty mind-blowing to see this band that not a lot of people probably knew who they were at the time, but everybody there being so into it. And yeah, that list, I could keep going on here and go on and on and on and on. I've been to so many shows, it's ridiculous. So it's hard to remember everything, but you know, those are some of my few most favorite shows I've ever been to. So, been to a lot of shows, and probably the most craziest situation I've ever seen at a show was in Rochester at a church bingo hall, and Integrity was the headlining band. They just put out Humanity is the Devil. That was like a huge hardcore album at the time. And so during the show, there's like most typical hardcore shows at the time, there's 20 bands before the actual band. And so you're sitting there and you're enduring this because it's just an onslaught. And finally Integrity is getting set up. They get playing, and it just right before Integrity hits the stage to play, I look at the front door, and about 8 or 9 of probably the biggest juiced pig Nazi boneheads come waltzing in the door. And these are not teenage kids. These are grown ass men. They look as scary as you can imagine. They're all decked out in black, and they come walking in. They don't even pay or anything. They just walk in as a group, and they go over, stand over to one side of the stage. I'm like, ooh, wow, there's some pretty heavy dudes here. Integrity comes out, first song, vocal test. Everybody is like dogpiling up at the front of the stage, and there's this big dude doing all the spin kick stuff and everything at the time. It was kind of like a newer thing, and he's right up there. He's tattooed from like his eyebrows right down to his big toes, and he's doing all the kicks. And I look at the back of the pit, and I see this Nazi skinhead put a neoprene ski mask on his head that had a skull airbrushed on the front of it with some stupid ass symbolism on it. And he just goes in the pit. I swear to God, this guy's forearms are like this. And he just starts going through the pit, and he is just cleaning house, taking 10 kids out at one time. And I'm like, I was thinking of getting like, yeah, I'm gonna go slay and dance. Yeah, no. I put my ass to the back of a wall, and I just watched this happen. And all I saw was that guy with the skull mask come up behind the big dude with the kickboxing shorts. And I swear to God, he smashed the dude in the back of the head. That dude with the kickboxing shorts turned around and roundhouse kicked this guy right in the head, laid him out. But that was the ignition point. And then all of a sudden, the room divided. And then all of a sudden it came together, and it was a full-on riot. I was there with buddies of mine in a band from Buffalo called Slush Fund, and the bass player, Cac, just ran over to me, grabbed me by my shirt, and he's like, "You're Canadian, we're getting you out of here right now because this is going to shit." We ran out of there, and if I didn't see it, but I know what a gun sound like, and all I heard was seeing flashes, and all I heard was pop, 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 and I'm like, do they have guns? None of us bothered to find out. We literally ducked, ran to the car, and got the register. So, actually, this leads into the other craziest thing I ever saw, and it didn't happen at a show, but Jimmy Vapid and me decided to go back to Rochester to go see the Regulations. And they're playing this part of Rochester that's pretty rough. And so again, it's a hardcore show, so there's about 2 million bands playing before Regulations. So you're like hanging around, going through, talking, and watching the bands. And finally, I'm like, I gotta get something to eat. I saw that there was a Wendy's down the street. And I think Little Jeff from, he played, at the time, played guitar in Haymaker. He was like, "Eric, we'll all go with you." So about 4 of us went to the Wendy's. And we get there, and as soon as I walk in, I'm walking up to the counter, and this huge dude grabs something and then runs out of Wendy's. And I'm like, what the, like, I've never seen anybody grab their food like that and run, like, just book it out. And the dude behind the counter jumps over the counter, pushes tables in front of the entrance doors of this Wendy's, turns around, looks at me, and goes, "You're not leaving." And I'm like, "What, are you gonna hold me hostage at Wendy's?" He goes, "No, we just got robbed." As we were walking in the door, that Wendy's was getting robbed in Rochester, and the dude was running out the door, so we're like, "Can I still order food?" The guy looks at me and like, "You smart ass kid." And he goes, "All right, fine." So he takes our order, and we sit there, and we're sitting there eating our food, and cops come walking in. They come right up to our table, and they're like, "What are you guys doing here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're just at a show down the street." And I guess we walked in the middle of a robbery, and the guy's like, "What's with your accents?" And we're like, "Accents?" We're like, "Well, we're from Canada." And they're like, "All right, you're fine. You guys finish up, and then you're getting the hell out of here." And we're like, and they're like, "And you're gonna walk all the way back straight to that show because do you know you're in Rochester and it's like 12:30 at night?" And we're like, "Yeah, man, whatever." Like, not knowing that like Rochester is a pretty hardcore city at that time. And yeah, that's a few of some of the craziest stuff I've seen at shows, but I'll just leave it with those 2 stories. So actually, one more crazy thing I saw at shows would have been a series of Haymaker shows. So everyone knows, if you're from Hamilton, about this legendary Corktown show where the Corktown got annihilated when Haymaker played. Haymaker didn't smash up the bar, it was the crowd. And yeah, I wouldn't say I was innocent. So either way, that show happened, a lot of crazy shit happened, chairs got smashed, shit got lit on fire, stacks got toppled, lighting rigs got ripped out of the ceiling, people got punched out. So that happened, and then a week later, Haymaker goes to play London at the Whippet Lounge. And to be honest, nobody from Hamilton did anything at the Whippet Lounge because there was like 5 of us, and I think it was Fucked Up's second show. Fucked Up plays, they get the crowd going there, and then Haymaker comes out. Haymaker didn't even get to play like 2 songs, and next thing you know, the crowd at that Haymaker show in London annihilates the Whippet Lounge to the point where I came back 8 years later and it was still annihilated. They never replayed, like kids were running around ripping light fixtures out of the walls and smashing them. Somebody took seat cushions off of a couch, sliced them up and threw all the stuffing everywhere. Like the place just got annihilated, and we're like, okay, London seems to be into it. And then another couple weeks later, they play the JCC in Toronto, and Haymaker plays, and again, it's not the band, and you know, I'm not going to say who it was, but I watched a certain guy literally walk all of Toronto hardcore out of the room because he went nuts, to the point where he had a steel bar in his hand and he was smashing it into the ground, telling everybody from Toronto he was going to kill and fight all of them. Yeah, that show didn't last long either. And so yeah, that was pretty crazy. I'm glad I was friends with this guy though, and that I knew enough to stand and keep my back to the wall and just watch the chaos happen. But yeah, I've probably seen a few crazy things at some shows. I played in Hamilton for quite some time now, and I played in a lot of bands. My past bands were, well, back in high school, I had an absolutely terrible band called Bowl Cut. It was with a boyfriend and girlfriend, and yeah, we were terrible, like just terrible. I think we had like one original, and we played an L7 and a Beastie Boys cover. We were so bad, and I knew this, that 2 days before we were going to play our first show in the high school cafeteria, I quit the band. So the band never actually, you know, happened. Then years and years later, I actually started playing in bands. My first real band was a band called Mother's Worry, Wild Zero, with Tim Beck and Kurt. I did that for a while. I also played in another band called The Orphans with some legendary Hamilton musicians. Dave Ellie, Scott Thacker, Mark Bull. Great guys, schooled me hard and really taught me a lot about playing in bands. Played in a Misfits cover band with a really good friend of mine by the name of Rob DeGrunt and Tim. Rob, unfortunately, is no longer here, and I miss him a lot. But again, he really, really helped me a lot to develop my kind of style and what I like, how I like to play. Also played in a band with another Hamilton legend by the name of Chris Crash. We had a band called Coffin Cheater that was around for about a year and a half. Played a couple shows. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, regardless of what you hear about Chris Crash, that's all in the past. He's awesome, one of the most awesome, nicest guys I've ever met. And I love him.
I agree.
Yeah, great guy. Other bands I played in, there's probably been a few here and there that never really developed into anything. And then back when I joined Horbiz, I also started playing in Vapids at that time, and played in the Vapids for quite some time. Then probably about 6-7 years ago, I started playing in a band called Flesh Rag with Matt Ellis and Berger. Total brothers, man. Love those guys to death. Again, that was my being in a wild and crazy rock and roll band, and I had a lot of fun. I love those guys so much, and I miss you, Berger. Why don't you come back? But you know, things do end. Pandemic kind of ended those stuff. So after the pandemic kind of went away, I started Wasted Age, and then my buddy of mine, Dave, asked me to join his band Hexoffender, and then I started this other band with my buddy Casey White called Streetmouth, and yeah, I never stop. I just always keep going and going and going. So who knows what I'll be in 2-3 years from now, or even when I'm an old man. Maybe I'll start playing at blues bands or something like that. So what I like most about being a musician is putting out records, playing shows, meeting people from different bands, from different parts of the country, and generally big thing is like playing shows. It's like a drug you just can't give up. There's nothing that can replace that, and I just love the feeling of having a crowd go off to your music, and listening to people really being into it. That's the big payoff for me for playing in bands. The thing I dislike about playing in bands, loading gear, long 5-6 hour drives back from playing shows in like Windsor or Peterborough, and you don't get home. You leave at 2 in the morning and you get home at 7. Dealing with totally messed up band members who probably took some stuff they shouldn't have taken, and you gotta kind of pull them together to play a show. And hopefully but there's not a lot actually that I dislike about being a musician. It's a lot of fun, and as long as you keep it fun and you don't take yourself too seriously, drop your pretentiousness, and be kind of accepting of how everyone is and what people like. Always remember, music is subjective. What turns another person's crank and do nothing for someone else. Just all like it, and don't take things too seriously. Yeah, pretty much about it. Okay, so my favorite food of all time is a dish called rouladen. It's a German dish that my mom used to make a lot, and it's pretty much it's real simple. You take flank steak, you pound it flat like paper, you put salt, pepper, mustard, and white onion, you roll them up, you fry them, and then you cook them in like a tomato-y kind of sauce. And I would literally, growing up, eat so much of that stuff when my parents made it that they literally would have to make, like, there was the normal dish of like, you get 2 or 3 each, then they would make another one because I would eat like 5 or 6. Still to this day, I still go to Denny's here in Hamilton, and they make rouladen, and I love it. It's one of the most best food items out there in the whole world. And I do have a hankering for Taco Bell. If you know me, I do love that kind of stuff. Okay, so been asked to tell you what my useless talent is, and probably the biggest useless talent I have is I have a head of useless knowledge. If it had something to do with punk rock in the 70s or hardcore in the 80s, I probably know the story that led up to it. I'm constantly reading and watching documentaries about this kind of stuff, and the thing is, it just sticks in my head until somebody tells a story, and then I probably wouldn't have thought of it for like 5 or 6 years. I can recount everything, and it's just not with music. I'm like that with history, with art. I just know a bunch of obscure, useless knowledge that would never really help me out, but it makes good for conversation. So that's, yeah, I'm great at retaining pointless stuff. So yeah, this is the end of the interview. I just want to thank Steve Reniewick for letting me come and wreck his video show, Stronger Than Ever. And yeah, man, I really appreciate it. Let me tell a bit of a story and kind of share my experience about what I've seen and done for the last few years here in this city. So thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.